Clay stared ahead into the never-ending sea of trees, flabbergasted at the sight. Handfuls of wildlife were fleeing from something wailing deep in the forest. A large buck whipped past him before he had a chance to fully get out of its destructive path, knocking him to the ground. Clay knew he was much too far from civilization to go and get someone to help for whatever was howling. He also knew he couldn't get help even if he was close, as he was technically trespassing on private property. Who owned the property was another mystery. Clay had scouted the area rather well, but had not come across a house or any forest-preserved buildings. Yet the perimeter of the forest, at least where he came in, was barred with extensive razor wire and old moldy signs that hardly made out the word trespassing. Clay was exhausted of hiking the same trails and seeing the same things all the time. He needed to go off the beaten path and have an adventure. The buck had vanished into the bushes behind him, and the sounds of broken sticks and shuffling leaves vanished with it. Clay sat upright and watched as the last of the wildlife fled the immediate area. The howling had echoed into nothingness, but the hair was still sticking up on Clay's arm and neck. It hadn't sounded like a wolf or coyote. Clay had an odd feeling in his gut, something that he had tried to ignore before entering the woods. Now he was in the middle of nowhere, armed only with a large hunting knife, DSLR camera, 3 ration bars, half-gallon of water, a compass, and a cell phone. Though, unfortunately for Clay, he had absolutely no reception, which rendered his phone useless if he ever needed it. Clay continued in the same direction, cautiously moving ahead. The camera was dangling from straps around his neck, haphazardly bouncing off his chest as he moves. The hunting knife in his right hand clenched so hard that his knuckles were almost white. 20 minutes had passed since he last heard that painful howl, and beginning to wonder if maybe it was all in his mind. Maybe the animals were running from a hunter, or the howling was from an animal that was suffering, maybe a wolf or something. Though it didn't sound like it. It didn't make sense at all, but he was trying to keep from letting his mind wander and create unrealistic scenarios. The landscape was hilly and tiring. Clay was waging whether he should turn back or continue. He finds a fallen tree next to a flower bed to rest on. He sheathes the knife and sits down. The autumn air crisped with the smell of dead leaves. He inhales deep and brings the camera up to his face. He takes a few random shots into the woods to fix his ISO. He decides that it'd be smart to take a picture of how far he'd made it into the unknown woods that he had traveled. He takes a panoramic shot of the area, accidentally keeping the flash on. He takes a look at the photo to make sure the brightness hadn't ruined it. Upon the observation, he notices a reflection of the flash about 100 yards across from him. Clay looks ahead, but only sees overgrown vegetation. He takes another photo in the same spot with the flash on. Something reflects the light again. Clay turns the camera off and lets it dangle from the straps once again. His curiosity gets the best of him, and he approaches the area, knife still in sheath, with his right hand close to the handle. It took a moment to move some of the branches and vines from obstructing his view. Once removed, he was looking at what could only be described as an old air vent tube protruding from the ground. Clay took out his phone and used the flashlight app to look into the vent, but to no avail. The darkness was too much for the light, only allowing about 15 feet or so. He began to wonder how far down it actually went. Once again, he brings out the camera to document his discovery. He takes a handful of photos, then aims into the metallic tube. The flash of the light ignites the dark void like a sun expelling light into the universe. He could see so far down that he felt like he was at the opening of a cave. He takes a few more shots, carefully looking past the flash to see if he can see any signs of life living down there. The last thing he needed was to be attacked by a rabid raccoon in an unfamiliar location. The last flash goes off. Clay jumps back and feels the goosebumps cause his hair to stick on end. Had he really just seen a face? He checks over his shoulder to make sure that he's alone. Clay takes a few steps back, not taking his eyes off the creepy tunnel. He checks the photo on the camera, which reveals a set of eyes looking at the camera, the light only bright enough to reveal an obscure outline of a jaw. Time ceased to exist for Clay as his bloodshot eyes looked through the camera, his mind in a panic. He wondered if it was possible that it actually is someone and not just an illusion, his trembling hands gripping the camera as if it had hidden answers. Clay quickly looks down the metal tube and then ducks away. He knows he can't leave if someone's actually trapped down there, but at the same time, his gut's screaming at him to get the fuck out of there. Clay musters the courage to lean back over, camera ready to take another shot as he calls out to whatever being lies in the darkness. "Hello? Someone down there?" He half-heartedly whispers, afraid of a response. Nothing comes back from the dark tomb. A faint beep is heard, making Clay jerk his body. The beeping is coming from the camera due to the battery being low. He decides to turn it off and conserve the remaining life in it. After he ducks back down, something hits the inside of the tunnel where Clay's head was. It sounded like a small stick had been thrown. Without getting up, Clay asks once again if someone's down there, only much louder this time. A gurgled reply echoes out, so faint Clay almost misses it. Clay's heart pounds furiously in his chest as his adrenaline rises. The thought that this person could be the victim of the howling thing he heard earlier crosses his mind. Maybe they need help. Clay asks if they're alright or needed any help. The only reply he got was hunger. No matter how many times he asked, it was always hunger. The voice didn't immediately send shivers down his spine, but it did startle him. Clay didn't know what to do, so he opened his bag and dropped down a ration bar, all without getting up to peek inside. He could hear something far down in the darkness messing with the wrapper. He waited a few more minutes before calling out again. "Do you need help?" "More." Clay was beginning to freak out a bit. He decided that he would toss down one more ration bar, but would leave and go back home right after. He wasn't sure what he was seeing or hearing. Maybe it was a sewer pipe and construction workers were down there or something. Then he remembered how far from the closest town he actually was. Whatever was down there was not a construction worker. Clay opens the bag and pulls out another ration bar. He doesn't want to drain the camera battery, so he pulls out his phone and turns on the flashlight. He carefully leans over and is about to drop the bar down, but he decides to look. As he peers in, an animal off in the distance breaks a tree branch, causing Clay to flinch and dropping his phone into the dark abyss. The descending light of the phone becoming smaller and smaller. It came to a stop, upright facing back at Clay. Clay was petrified at what he had just done. The phone itself had flipped a dozen times before coming to a halt, but just before it hit the ground, Clay saw a face. It looked as if there were no eyes or eyebrows, and the nose had been flattened or removed. The teeth were blackened and broken. Either the lips were bleeding or removed completely. On top of it all, it was fucking smiling at him. If it did have eyes, they were fixed on his. Clay took off, sprinting in the direction that he had come, his mind running faster than he was. The howling noise came back, this time seemingly emitting from the depths of the tube. Metal scrapes and what could only be described as nails on a chalkboard accompanied the painful howls of the unknown thing. It sounded like it was trying to get out of the darkness. It sounded like it was trying to climb up that tube. The metal screeches and grinds were becoming louder by the second. Was it nearing the top? Clay's legs were moving as fast as they could. Everything around him seemed to become clearer in a way. He entered the area not seeing the weird, intricate carvings in the trees. Some of them seemed familiar, but only mimicked a memory. It was enough to make him regret ever going past the razor wire fence. He ran until he was out of breath and then ran some more. By the time he was back near town, the sun was setting, his heart ready to explode. He eventually found himself near a park where he found a bench and sat down. He opened his camera and looked back at all the photos. They were all there except for the ones with the eyes and the jawline. However, there was also a video that he had apparently recorded just a few seconds ago. Clay hadn't realized he had been recording. The clip itself was only 6 seconds long. He plays the footage and doesn't see anything unusual. He plays it a second time just to confirm, but he hears something in the background that catches his ear. He puts his ear up to the speaker, only to hear an angry gurgled whisper cutting through. Clay breaks down hysterically, unable to control himself. Only Clay knows what it said, and only Clay understands. This would be a happy ending, only Clay didn't go back home, and his whereabouts remain a mystery.